My name is Mark Crawford, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been practicing here in Atlanta for a little over 30 years. I have a private practice and I do some consulting. How I got to Purpose on Tap was through some of the guys that started it. I've known Calder Justice and Matthew Cesari really since they were probably in middle school, because I know their parents, and have formed a good relationship, friendship with those guys. And Tucker Yates, I've known about him and have worked with folks who know him for decades probably. And they invited me to come and speak, and I was excited to do it. So here I am. As clearly as I can recall anything, it came to me that I'm going to be a psychologist. I'd always taken classes in that field and enjoyed it, and I just felt a real strong calling to do that. I work with people of really all faiths, so I really don't proselytize. When I have people of faith, I'm very comfortable integrating their faith, my faith, with what we're talking about. And if you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, who would you choose other than Jesus, because everybody chooses that? And I'm going to go back to about 1000 BC, and I'm going to choose King Solomon, an ancient Israeli king. And the reason I'm going to choose him is because the Bible says that he had the opportunity, God offered him, ask me anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And Solomon said, I want a wise and discerning heart to govern your people. And God liked that answer and said, I'm going to make you the wisest man that's ever been. And not only that, because you didn't ask, I'm going to give you wealth and honor. So the Bible says that he was the wisest man who ever lived, and he wrote a book. The book's called Proverbs. And since I was a little boy, I've always been encouraged to read Proverbs, try to read a chapter a day. And so tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I think if we read Proverbs, there are 10 themes that I think we can take away from the wisest man who ever lived, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight.
I just asked you to give a warm welcome and a warm introduction to Dr. Mark Crawford.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you coming out. Calder, appreciate the introduction. Boy, could I tell some stories about you if it weren't a HIPAA violation. I would. But I'll save those. So let me get synced up here. And what I want to do tonight, guys, is I want to share just a few things that are kind of more personal than in most of my talks. By the way, disclaimer, this is not referring to me. I'll explain the title in a minute. I do not think I'm the world's wisest man. I may be the wisest man on this stool, but that's about as far as I'm going to go. So I want to share just a few things that are meaningful to me personally. Usually I'm talking about data and brain imaging and science and stuff like that. Tonight I get to talk about something much more fun and personal to me. And then I'm going to save some time and open it up, and I'm happy to talk about anything you want. But as I was thinking about when I was your age, what are some things that I think would be helpful? This is kind of what I came up with. And so I want to start with sort of, if you've ever been on that awkward first date or sort of at a party where you don't know anybody and there's a lull in the conversation, the real easy sort of let me get the conversation started question is, if you could have dinner with anyone ever, living or dead, other than Jesus, because everybody says that's too easy, who would you choose? So people come up with all kinds of things. Oh, Bezos or Churchill or whatever. So the person I would choose, I'm going to go back to 1000 BC, and I'm going to choose an ancient Israeli king, and his name is Solomon. And the reason I'm going to choose Solomon is because of a story about him. Solomon, by the way, was, David the giant slayer, was the, ultimate king of Israel, Hall of Fame king of Israel, and he had a son, his name was Solomon, who took over when David died. So the only time in the Bible God acts like the genie in Aladdin's lamp, he says to Solomon, your father was faithful to me, I'm pleased with you, ask me whatever you want and I'll give it to you. Now that's an offer, right? God says to you, ask me whatever you want and I'll give it to you. That's pretty tempting, right? So Solomon said, I'm going to ask for a wise and discerning heart so I can govern your people. And God really liked that answer, and he said, done. Not only that, I'm going to make you the wisest person there's ever been. There'll be no equal to you ever. And because you didn't ask, I'm going to give you wealth and honor. So it's like the lottery, right? Jackpot, And so I think wow, the wisest man who ever lived, that's who I want to have dinner with. So he wrote a book, several books in the Bible. One is called Proverbs, which you probably know about. And so the reason that book is meaningful to me is when I was a kid, my mother and my grandmother always used to say, read Proverbs, read Proverbs, read Proverbs, because there's wisdom in there. And so I kind of started reading it. And then throughout my life, I kept getting pointed to this, and I decided I was going to read a chapter a day from then on. And there's 31 chapters, so if you read a chapter a day, you'll read it 12 times in a year. So that's a lot of Proverbs, but I've gotten some things out of that have kind of guided my life, and I just want to share what those are, and maybe one or two of these could be takeaways for you, but this is sort of, for me, just I think what are some guiding principles, and some that I try to help other people employ in their life. So the first one, I think, if we sat down with Solomon, he would probably start by asking us a question, and I think what he would say is, what are you pursuing? We're men, we're going to seek something. We're going to pursue something. And the question you ask yourself is, what is it that I'm really pursuing? If you don't know, think about how you spend the majority of your time and money, and that will answer your question. Because we all pursue something. Some people pursue wealth. Some people pursue fame, respect. Some people pursue a woman. There's all kinds of things we can chase and pursue, but it matters. A lot of people will answer that question, well, I'm just going to pursue happiness. That's in our Constitution. I'm just going to pursue happiness. Well, I'll tell you, as a scientist, that's a lousy thing to pursue. And I'll tell you why. Because all the research shows that if you pursue happiness, you will likely only fleetingly find it, and it'll not last. Because that is pursuing sort of what we call hedonic happiness or pleasure. If you go all the way back to Aristotle, he said, he defined happiness as eudaimonia, which is sort of living a life of virtue and character, and that is what creates happiness. But I think what Solomon would tell us in Proverbs is to seek wisdom above all things. Seek wisdom. And I'm just going to give you a few quotes here real quickly, just to kind of tell you how often this shows up in the book of Proverbs. How much better to get wisdom than gold? Anytime he says gold or silver, it just means money, wealth. How much better to get wisdom than wealth? Blessed are those who find wisdom, who gain understanding. She's more profitable than wealth and returns more than gold. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Do not let wisdom out of your sight. Preserve sound judgment and discretion. Don't forsake wisdom, and she'll protect you. Love her, and she'll watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. Choose instruction instead of silver, knowledge rather than gold. For wisdom is more precious than rubies, and nothing you desire can compare to her. He goes on, the one who gets wisdom loves life. The one who cherishes understanding will prosper. A discerning person keeps wisdom. It goes on and on. Know that wisdom is like honey. If you find it, there is a future hope for you. So this is probably the one thing he talks about the most, which is seek and pursue wisdom before anything else in your life. And so the question is, well, what's that look like? How do you pursue wisdom? Well, I'll tell you where you don't find wisdom. At least I don't think you find wisdom. I don't think we find wisdom in social media. Now, not that, I think social media is bad necessarily, but we spend a lot, well, I don't, but a lot of people spend a lot of time on social media. I'm too old to have social media. I'm not there. But here's what I found. I did some research, and the average person spends 2 hours and 37 minutes a day on social media, which sounds like, okay, that's not terrible. Well, I did the math, and if you add that up in a year, if you took 12-hour days, that's 79 12-hour days on social media of a year in your life. That's a lot of time, okay? 79 days a year I'm just spending on social media. That's not really pursuing wisdom. Then there's the other place we spend more time: Netflix, Hulu, Showtime, Amazon Prime. And listen, don't get me wrong, I'm always down for a good series. I think it's great. But what the research shows is, if you really look at it, people spend on average 4 hours and 46 minutes watching TV, consuming media. I did the math on that. That's 145 12-hour days a year, okay? That's a lot of time. So I think if you think about it, you are even close to those averages, or if I'm even close to those averages, if I took just a fraction of that time and devoted it to something else, how would that change my life? So it's really caused me to really think about how I spend my time. What does seeking wisdom look like if we don't find it there? Well, I think for me, it's always been seeking the mind and heart of God. What does He know? What does He want? What does He want me to know? And where I find that's really reading the Bible. And I know that maybe sounds like a boring thing. It ain't. I'm going to tell you a story in a minute that will make you maybe think, maybe that's an interesting book. But I think we have to be aware that that's a place where wisdom is found. And I also think it means seeking practical wisdom. If you want to be good at something, you got to study it. My training director in grad school said, listen, 50% of what you learn here will be obsolete within 7 years. You have to learn how to learn and learn the rest of your life. So devoting time to that is also seeking wisdom. So that's the first thing I think he tells us. The first of 10 things. Seek wisdom above all things. Everything else falls in line. And I've really taken that to heart. The second thing is this. Life is nonlinear. I've done what I do for 30 years. I've talked to literally now thousands of people, a lot of them very, very, very successful. And what I've learned is that very few people who are really successful can say, I charted that course in my 20s and I knew exactly every step of the way. What they say instead is, there were these forks in the road all along the way that I could not predict. And I took this turn and it led me here, and I met this person and it took me here. And at the end, I ended up here. I never could have seen how that happened. Our lives are like that. Every year you'll encounter many, many forks in the road. And some of them will be very obvious in terms of their importance. Do I take this job? Do I quit this job? Do I get married to this girl or this woman? Do I have a child? These are big decisions, and in those decisions we see that they're important. However, there are more real subtle forks in the road that we just sort of don't even think about. I call them micro decisions, but they can be just as important in changing the trajectory of our lives. And I could tell you 1,000 stories. One for me was, there was this one night where a friend invited me to a Christmas party at a church, and it was Friday, and I just got back from the hospital working, and I was tired, and I didn't want to go. And he said, come on, man, you never know what could happen. And I said, all right, I'll go. And the first person I met was the woman I've been married to for 27 years. No way I would have met her any other way. That was just one of those little forks in the road I took. So we never really think too much about those. But I think what Solomon would say is this. Who's guiding your path in those little micro decisions? Who's directing your steps? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. Commit to the Lord whatever you do, those micro decisions, and He will establish your plans. In the heart, humans plan the course, but the Lord directs their steps. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails, and a person's steps are directed by the Lord. Point here is this. I think it's important for us to consider that maybe we need to be looking for guidance in even the smallest decisions, and just being open to that. I always say, I think God's leading is like a radio station that's constantly broadcasting, but we're often not on the station, so we miss it. And I think it's just being aware and inviting guidance in those little decisions, and just sometimes just that little nudge, maybe I should do this, is guidance. I think that's just something we should think about. The third thing that I think he would say is countercultural. Our culture does not usually tell men to be humble. Humility is not something that's really valued, but Solomon says it many times throughout Proverbs. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Wisdom's instruction is to fear the Lord, and humility comes before honor. Pride goes before destruction. Once again, a haughty spirit before a fall. Before a downfall, the heart is haughty. These are all warnings, but humility comes before honor. Let someone else praise you and not your own lips. So for these, I would say, being humble does not mean being a pushover. Being humble does not mean not being ambitious. Being humble does not mean being weak or being ineffectual. But it's one of the things he encourages us throughout to have a spirit of humility. And I think that'll serve you well. The next thing I think he would say, and he says it a lot, is be willing to work really, really hard. I'm old enough now to see that cultural ideas and norms shift. when I was younger, in my 20s, the idea of a work-life balance really meant don't work so much that you don't have some time for your family and recreation. And I'll be honest with you, what I've seen happen, the pendulum rarely swings and stops in the middle. It usually goes from one extreme to the other over many generations. I'm seeing and hearing more and more now people talking about work-life balance means I'm not letting work interfere with anything I enjoy, okay? I'm going to do the minimal thing because my life is all about having fun and enjoying it. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people who kind of have this, they have not developed the capacity to what I call grind, which means you do something hard and boring and for a long time until it results in what the outcome you're looking for. But that's a skill we have to, no one I know who's successful does not have that ability. They grind, they work really hard at something and they don't give up. The term is called grit. He talks about this a lot. This is a long one, but he talks about go to the ant who doesn't have a commander or overseer yet. He gathers food in the harvest. How long will you lie there, you sluggard? How long? Get up from your sleep. A little slumber, a little folding of the hands, and poverty comes on you like a thief and scarcity like an armed man. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. Those who work the land have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense. Diligent hands will rule, but laziness ends in forced labor. All hard work brings profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. These are just on and on he goes. I'm not going to read them all, but do not love sleep or you'll grow poor. Stay awake and you'll have food to spare. Whoever loves pleasure will become poor, but whoever loves wine and oil will never be rich. I think one of the things that's contributed to this, and I always say this to high school seniors, I said, the advice I don't like for you that I hear all the time is find your passion. And I'm going to tell you why I don't like that advice, because a couple things. The implication is it's just going to hit you like Paul on the road to Damascus. Passion will fall on you and it will be just sort of this epiphany and then that's it. The rest of things are effortless and it's all going to be fun and you'll enjoy it. And the implication is you don't really have to work hard if you find your passion. Success just follows and it's kind of you enjoy. Every Monday you can't wait to go to work. That just doesn't happen. All right? It's just not like that. You have to work hard. Passion is developed. It is not discovered. And what I always tell seniors is find something that you're pretty good at, you're fairly interested in, and work your ass off for 10 years. Then you'll either have a passion or you'll be pretty successful. But I think that's something we just got to be prepared for. I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of times people say, I don't think I'm in the right job, or, I just don't love work, so I don't know if I found the right career. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not sure that's a reasonable expectation. Work hard at it, be patient, and it pays off, and oftentimes you develop a passion. The fifth thing I think he would tell us is to choose your words carefully. There's a book called The Four Agreements. It sold 8.2 million copies. I would love to write a book that sells 500,000 copies, because that's rare, 8.2 million. It talks about four things. The first one, which he says in the book is the most important, is be impeccable with your word. What we say matters. What we say affects people and it affects us. And I think one of the things that I've found is that social media makes it even harder to be careful with your words because people spout things off. We see it all the time. But what Solomon says is keep your mouth free of perversity, keep corrupt talk from your lips. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even tempered. Fools have no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. Sounds like Twitter to me. The tongue has the power of life and death. Those who guard their mouth and tongues keep themselves from calamity. And one who's pure in heart speaks with grace and will have a king for a friend. Our words matter, guys, and I think we need to be really aware of what it is we say. The sixth thing he would tell us is be generous. Now, generous is more than just a virtue. To me, it's an antidote. What I've learned over the years is we all have these innate character, I call them character flaws or just default mode sort of ways of acting and thinking that could get us in trouble. And one of them we all have is selfishness. We're just selfish people by nature, right? We just want what we want when we want it. And we have to work hard to kind of get that rough edge filed off. Another default mode is to be sort of greedy and to be selfish. And the antidote to these things is not a thought, it's an action. And I think generosity is the antidote to greed and selfishness. Andy Stanley, who a lot of you guys know, says basically giving to others really changes our mindset from being an owner to being a steward, of being aware that what we get is a gift. I've seen a lot of very wealthy people in my career, and most of us think wealth is synonymous with freedom, but let me tell you something. A lot of people that I've seen, wealth is a prison. The things and the money they accumulate begin owning them, and they become obsessive with it. But Solomon would say, those who are kind to benefit themselves, generous person will prosper, and who refreshes others will be refreshed. Whoever's kind to the needy honors God, and whoever's kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have. And the generous themselves will be blessed, for they share their food with the poor. I think that's just an action that keeps us from becoming sort of just selfish and greedy. The seventh one, he devotes 3 chapters to, 3 of 31. And this is about our spouse. If you're not married yet and you're looking for the right candidate, the last chapter will tell you what to look for. He describes a wife of noble character. These are the qualities that I think are valuable, and it has nothing to do with swiping right or how they look. I know a little about social media. But 2 of the other chapters have to do with, once you find her, honoring that commitment, okay? Being true to your wife and honoring that commitment. And he talks about the pitfalls of the lips of an adulterous woman drip honey, and ends with her steps lead straight to the grave. That's a pretty harsh warning. Keep away from your neighbor's wife. And if your neighbor, sure, better keep away from my wife. From the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust after her beauty or let her captivate you with her eyes. I know lots of guys who have fallen in this area. We're men, we're human. This is a very, very vulnerable area for many men. And part of this is because, let me tell you, man, I've been married 27 years. Your wife will disappoint you sometimes. She will not be everything you hoped for. She will be moody sometimes. She will be unavailable sometimes. But that's okay, because we're committed. Paul says to love our lives like Christ loved the church. That only happens when they're not lovable. Otherwise, it's just easy, okay? And it changes us. When I didn't get married till I was 30, and my business partner, who I've known forever, said, I'm so glad you're finally getting married, because marriage is God's tool to get at the character flaws he cannot reach when you are single. And he has been right. I've thought about that about every week of my life. It's so true. But here's the thing I want to say. I've talked to so many great guys who they have fallen, and they read this and they say, I wish I had read this earlier. I wish I had paid attention to this. Here's the good news. God is a God of redemption and of grace, and can heal this. Here's the cool part of the story. Solomon, we know, was David's son. Anybody know who Solomon's mother was? Bathsheba. Bathsheba is the woman that David saw on the rooftop bathing one time and said, she's looking pretty hot, had an affair with her, and then decided to send her husband, because David was commander-in-chief, to battle and told all the troops to withdraw so they would kill him. So he basically killed her husband. Bathsheba got pregnant. That baby died. Nathan, the prophet, came and confronted David and said, what are you doing? And David was remorseful. He was truly remorseful. He saw what he did. He owned it. He repented. Then God blessed them with another son, and that was Solomon, who we're talking about, right? Out of difficulty, out of our greatest failures, God can sometimes produce some amazing things. As an aside, if you've never read the Bible, here's why I would encourage you to read it. There's some stuff in there that's pretty like, really? For example, David had other sons. One was named Amnon. Amnon raped his sister, his half-sister. His other brother, David's other son, Absalom, killed Amnon and then led a revolt against David and was killed. Here's the point here. For people who say, I just don't know that the Bible's true, I think somebody just made that up. If you were making that up to create heroes of the faith, that might read good on an HBO series today, but thousands of years ago, that just wasn't going to fly with the storyline, okay? I just don't think anybody makes this up and says, here's a great story of God and of a hero of faith. I think that makes me believe the Bible more because some of that stuff in there just isn't real flattering, just to be honest with you. So this 8th thing he would tell us is don't let your anger control you. Now, anger's an emotion. And contrary to what a lot of people think, it's not always a negative emotion. Anger is sometimes a very useful emotion because when channeled correctly, it energizes us to do things that are difficult. Sometimes we have to be angry to confront an injustice. Sometimes we have to be angry to set a limit or just to say enough or to do things. But when we don't regulate it, when we let it take over, then it can become very destructive. He says this, fools show their annoyance at once, but the prudent overlook an insult. A quick-tempered person often does foolish things. I could give you a million stories about that one. Whoever's patient has great understanding, but the one who's quick-tempered displays folly. And better a patient man than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. A fool is quick to quarrel, and like a city whose walls are broken is a person who lacks self-control. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. For some men, I see uncontrolled anger as the one thing that destroys their careers and relationships, and it limits them in their life. 2 more quickly. He would tell us to accept advice, to be teachable. The most successful people I've worked with are very proactive in seeking advice. They know they don't know everything, and they look to people who are wiser and who have expertise in areas that they don't to give them advice, and they really consider it. This is really, really important. My father always used to tell me, no matter how far you go in life, always remember there's somebody out there smarter than you, which is not advice most people give their kids today, right? It's like, oh, you can be so you can do everything right. I'm glad he told me that because he was right? I always know there's someone who knows a little more, and I want that input. I'm going to seek that out. Whoever heeds life-giving correction will be at home with the wise. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they exceed. Wisdom is found in those who take advice. Whoever gives heed to instruction prospers. Listen to advice and accept discipline, and at the end you will be counted among the wise. Plans are established by seeking advice. He just goes on and on. This is all throughout Proverbs. Surely you need guidance to wage a war, and victory is won through many advisors. Whoever remains stiff-necked, that's stubborn, after many rebukes will be suddenly destroyed without remedy. And the way of a fool seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. When I think I know everything, I'm in trouble. I need advice. Never believe you know everything. And here's the thing, pay close attention when you get advice that causes that little internal conflict where you say, you know, something in there sounds right, but I don't like it. That's when you need to lean in. You really pay attention to that because that's it. Now, the last thing I think you would say is this, choose your friends carefully. My partner at his 60th birthday, my business partner, shared the story. He says, and I see it all the time because I see his office. He's got a picture in his room that's just a bunch of people. And he says, each person there is somebody who is influential in me being who I am today and where I am today. This is sort of my board of advisors. This is my collage. And he challenged the people at his birthday party. He said, you know, think about who's in your picture. Because you've all got one. It may not be on your wall, but you have one. And whoever is in there is important because they're influencing you one way or the other. And then he summarized by saying, to live a life well lived, end up on someone else's wall. Be in their picture. And I thought that was really a great thing. The righteous choose their friends carefully. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. We can all find people to blow smoke up our rear. All of us. I can find anybody to agree with anything if I want to. But that doesn't help me. A real friend is going to call me on my BS. He's going to say, you know what, you're off here. You are not thinking about this right. And that's a friend that I'm going to value. Have people in your life who love you enough to say, you're off, you're wrong, this is not a good idea, think about this. Because that's what a friend does. As iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. We get dull when we're not challenged. Don't surround yourself with the Greek chorus who just tells you what you want to hear. Have people in your life, invite them in your life then do life with them, who can say, look, I know you and I care about you, and I want to give you some feedback here. So after dinner, if I'm taking notes, here's my 10 takeaways that I try to use to guide my life. Seek wisdom before anything else. Let God guide your steps and your decisions, even the little ones. Stay humble. Don't be afraid to work hard. Choose your words carefully. Be generous. Honor your commitment to your wife. Don't let your anger control you. Accept advice and choose your friends carefully. There's a lot more in Proverbs. I love the book. I read it as often as possible, and I encourage you to spend some time in there, but I think these 10 takeaways are a decent start, at least for me. So that's enough of me. Let me open this up. You can ask me whatever you want related to this or not, and I'd love to hear from you. What do you have? Yes, sir. Did you hear the question? The question's about that grinding, right? That the muscle, that the ability to push through when it's just hard and boring and there's nothing interesting about it and you don't see any immediate payoff. The time that comes to mind for me is when I was in graduate school, we had these things called our doctoral written exams. At the end of our program, you study for all semester, and basically you have to know everything you've ever learned. And at the end of that process, you have 3 days that are divided into 2 sections. The first section's 3 hours, you get lunch. The second section's 3 hours. And for each section, you have 2 questions that you have to answer. So basically, you got 3 hours to answer 2 questions on a topic, like abnormal psychology, assessment, research and design, just you name it, child pathology, all this stuff. If you fail more than 2 sections, you get 1 shot to take it over. If you fail 2 or 1, you get to take those 1 or 2 over. If you fail a second time, you're out of the program. Goodbye, thanks for playing, try another career. There was nothing rewarding about studying this stuff. I had no passion for it. It was just memorizing and mastering information. And a lot of people I saw, a lot of my classmates, I saw some people just breaking down crying. I cannot do this. I just don't think I can do this anymore. We would study 8 hours a day for months doing this. That required some grinding. And I just remembered, you know what? I want what this is going to lead me to so badly, I'll do whatever it takes. And I just pushed through it. That's just the first thing that comes to mind. But I'm telling you, that's a muscle. The research on this, there's cool research out there. Kelly McGonigal wrote a book called The Willpower Instinct that's about the neuroscience of willpower. Angela Duckworth is a researcher in the area called grit. And basically what they all say is the brain, you've heard of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity says what we do changes our brain. Great example is the part of the brain that controls finger movements on the hand is denser in concert violinist and pianist. The area of the hippocampus that stores spatial memory is denser in inner city cab drivers. The reason is they've used that part of the brain so much, they've fired it so much, you create more synaptic connections and you have more gray matter, which is what that is. Grinding through a task that is not interesting, focusing your attention when everything else is more interesting, changes your brain if you do it long enough and makes it easier. So the more you practice it, the easier it gets, ironically. But if we don't develop the muscle. So that's a great question. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
You had one book recommend besides the Bible?
Wow, that's a really hard question. One book to recommend besides the Bible, what would it be? I wrote a couple of books. I wouldn't recommend those. They're very specific. I wrote a book on OCD. So if you have OCD, I recommend that one. I also wrote a book for couples when they have their first child. It is usually a crisis point in the marriage. Everybody focuses on the baby. They forget to be a couple. The marriage starts to erode. I wouldn't recommend that as the book I would recommend. Ben, what's the book I recommend most often? Do you know?
The Bible?
Besides the Bible, he said. I'd have to think about that, man. That's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I might get back to you. Let me ruminate on that. Yeah. There's so many good ones out there. Yeah. How do you know you're making a wise decision? Well, first and foremost, for me, I rarely let a day go by that I don't pray for wisdom. I pray every day for God's wisdom in my life. So I would encourage you to do that. If I'm making a big decision, I will spend a lot of time just seeking God, lead me here. And listen, I've never heard God's voice ever. I've had I've had nudgings and things line up. But for me, it's got to be consistent with these principles. Any decision I make that sort of is inconsistent with what basically the Scripture says, that can't be a wise decision. I just don't think that's wise. So it has to be consistent. That's number one. Number two, I seek advice from people I trust, who I think have good judgment. And I seek it from people I know will challenge me. So many times I've seen people, I'm going to make this decision, and they'll find the people that agree with them because they want to be talked into it. Find the people that you know may not agree with you because they care. So I seek advice, I pray about it, I say, is it consistent with this? And then sometimes I'll wait. If I'm not clear, no one likes uncertainty. We just want to make it, I need an answer, I need an answer, I need an answer. One of the things I find and I encourage people to do is sit through the ambiguity, tolerate the uncertainty until clarity comes. Because sometimes that's where you hear God's voice. Sometimes that's where things happen. So that's a Cliff Notes version. Yes, sir. That goes back to that thing I said a minute ago. We all have to be aware of our natural tendencies that are unhealthy. We're all by nature selfish. We just are. I just say you have to just acknowledge that. And to change that part of us requires action. And you hit the nail on the head. The antidote to selfishness is service. That's it. And if you don't practice it, you will remain selfish. And so what I say is look for ways to be of service, even small ways. I always think about when, and I really kind of do this consciously, if I can do something for my wife that I don't want to do, even if it's small, as an act of service without an expectation, I am basically filing down the selfishness in me. Because I know it's there. I mean, I'm an only child, man. I have to file down more than most of you. I can be so selfish at times. I have to work not to be. So I look for ways to serve, even in small ways. If I can just do something for someone. This morning at the gym, I had an opportunity. All the towels were gone. I get there really, really, really early. A guy came by, and I swim, so I had a wet one around me and a dry one beside me. He said, "Hey man, where'd you find the towel?" I said, "Well, they were all gone. I think I got the last one." I had an opportunity to say, "You know what, I got two, even though this one's wet. Have this one." And that would have been an act of service. I gotta be honest with you, I didn't do it because I was selfish. And I didn't. And I thought about it for like 2 hours. Like, that would have been so easy to do. It's an ongoing battle, right? So Dennis, you are so right. Service is the only antidote to selfishness. And if we're not practicing that, at least daily, in small ways, it will take over. 30 years ago versus today. What's changed the most? I think what I'll just tell you what comes to mind, because I haven't really given this too much pontification. So one of the things that's changed the most is what I said earlier. I think, and I don't think this is y'all's fault, I'll be honest with you. When y'all, I'm talking to people maybe under 40, because I'm old, is the expectation that I can find a career that will be ultimately fulfilling and rewarding and will pay, and I don't have to work for 15 years before it becomes that, doing something that just sucks, because sometimes it will. It's the impatience for the process. I think I've seen that change. Blame it on whatever you want, social media, video games, I don't care. But I see that a generation ago, I think people had much more tolerance for patience and grinding and methodical, just hard work. That's one thing I've seen change. The other thing I think I've seen changed is sort of this, there's less of a sense of community. I see so many people. I just read a study, interestingly enough, and yeah, millennials is who it targeted, but it said 2 or 3% of millennials say they have no friends, and over 30% said they have no best friend. That was staggering to me. I don't read much research that surprises me, but there's a disconnect. And so I think it's about connecting. It's about really, and by the way, we do know social media creates more feelings of loneliness and depression than connection. So those are some of the trends I'm seeing. I'll tell you another trend I'm seeing, and I'm worried about it, is substance abuse, okay? I don't mean just, listen, I'm always down for, the only reason I'm not having a beer tonight is because I cannot wake up in the morning if I do during the week, so I can't do it. But I think moderation is fine, but the rates of abuse are going up, and another study is millennials have skyrocketing rates of liver cancer and cirrhosis because of binge drinking. So I see less moderation and more just way over the top. And Ben will roll his eyes when I say this because I preach it all the time. I really am concerned about the press on weed. The science on weed is not really good. There's nothing performance enhancing about weed, okay? And I see a whole generation of young adults who are really ceiling out. They're hitting the ceiling really low and not progressing because of the lack of motivation, the effects on working memory, and all of the things we know scientifically that it does if you go down that road too long. So I'm not a fan, and I see that a lot. Yeah. Yeah, great. So some things have always been and always will be. And we're guys, so sex, right? Sex. We love it, right? We're guys. It's just something where it's inborn, it's biological. And we, and this is that selfish thing, most guys get married with the expectation that my sexual frustration is over once I get married. Guys, it doesn't even begin until you get married. Right? It just doesn't. That's just the way it is, man. And part of that's a selfish thing, right? She's not there to be my sexual fulfilling partner. She's there to be my partner. Sex should be an outcropping of the emotional connection. It should be an expression of love. And so that has always been and still is. The only difference now is porn is out there, right? So that's a whole different area, right, of guys who are going to that. And I'll be honest with you, I see guys really kind of messing up their intimate world because of porn. Porn is the most artificial form of intimacy. It's not intimacy at all. You could go and see animals at the zoo, it's about as intimate. It's pure, distilled sexual gratification without any work, without any talking, communicating, resolving conflict. Intimacy is about that stuff. So that's one that's just always going to be there, right? The whole sex thing. The other thing is just pride. Guys, we're prideful guys, right? We have to work hard to not be proud. Those are just two things that I think I've seen consistently for 30 plus years. Yeah. What I always tell people is, and just so you know, look, every morning I go in early and I pray for every person that comes in my office that day that God will give me wisdom to give them what they need to hear and the courage to say it with love and to hear with understanding. So that's my prayer every morning without fail. What I always tell people is, look, I owe it to you to tell you what I see and what I think. I'm not always right, and I know that, okay, because I have worked on being humble. So you need to take what I'm telling you and you need to consider it and see if that's the right thing for you. But I feel like if I don't say that, I'm not being helpful. I'm not being faithful to what I've been asked to do. You had one, I think. Yeah.
Coming from your wife, what kind of man would she say you are?
Oh, that is. Yeah, exactly. Called her. What? My son is here. My youngest son is here. What would she say, Ben?
The base.
That's a great question. She would say that she is honest. She would say, you're dependable. You care about your family. You're a hard worker. You can be stubborn as hell. You can be opinionated. What else would she say? Seriously, is that what she'd say? She may say that. Yeah, she knows my good and my bad, right? And that's the thing. What's that? Strict. Yeah, she might say I'm strict. Yeah, I know you would. You'll thank me someday. So that's one thing about, if you're married with somebody long enough, and this is one of the things John Gottman, he's the kind of the guru of marriage. John Gottman has studied couples. That's all he's done. He's studied couples and followed them for decades, from the time they get married till they either stay married for 20 years or they get divorced. And he's said scientifically what's different. One of the things he found is couples who stay together and do well, when you are with somebody long enough, you're going to have two lists. These are the things about my wife I admire, respect, appreciate, love, etc. These are the things that get under my skin, bug me, I wish were different, didn't know it was going to be like this. We just got two lists, right? So our brain is going to want to focus on this list because we want, if that changed, I'd be happier. If you could just do that differently. The couples who do well focus their attention on the things they admire, appreciate, and respect. Because by doing that, and that takes work, that takes effort, these things become less sort of problematic, because you're not going to marry a perfect person, and neither did she, by the way. So you accept there are some things here, maybe that's not how I would order it off the menu, but never lose sight of the reasons you married her, and nurture those, and kind of have those in front and center, because that creates a mindset, and you don't take it for granted. So that's just really important if you're married, guys, is always start the day by reminding yourself, what is it about her I admire, I appreciate, I respect, and say it to her. And that keeps that negativity bias from going to the one thing like, God, why can't she just shut a drawer when she opens it, right? Why can't, you'd be surprised at the things that get people all bent out of shape, right? But that just takes work. That's that whole antidote. It really works. So.
Awesome. Thank you.
We good? Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.